Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Uh, Very good morning. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude and also my sincere apologies to Professor Mazlina and also to all the participants for waiting. There was a bit of misunderstanding. I really thought that the session will be later in the afternoon. I just realized that it's supposed to be in the morning. So sorry to keep you waiting. And also, it's a bit of a contradiction actually, because the topic that I'm presenting today is about digital technology, navigating childhood in the digital technology. But somehow I have to admit that I'm not really familiar with Google Meet. Most of the time I'm using Zoom, so my apologies for not using the virtual background. Yeah. So yeah, I will be sharing my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen now? Uh,
Yes,
yeah.
Professor. Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So the topic that I'm presenting today, again, thank you very much for the opportunity, Professor Mazlina. Hopefully one day I'll be able to see all of you in person. Yeah. So the topic that I'm going to present today is about navigating childhood in the digital age. And I think this is such an important topic because when we are talking about children and digital age, at the moment, very often we are bounded by these two binary ways of thinking. And I think the first thinking is very much protectionist in nature, which argue that technology brings harmful to the children, that children should not have access to technology because there are so many uh, uh, disadvantage or so many harms that the children can expose to. And also there is also a fear of the online bullying, the online violence, the online based sexual violence. So there are a lot of discourse that try to limit children's access to technology, which is not completely wrong and to some extent can be understood as well. And the other discourse, sort of like it's more like a more liberalist approach, which believe that children should have full access to technology, that technology brings a good thing to the children, that, you know, in this era of very fast information, everybody, including children, needs to have access to technology. So in this presentation, I sort of like to disrupt the binary between the protectionist and also the liberalist approach in viewing how children and childhood should navigate their access to technology in this digital age. So first of all, I think it is all we all acknowledge that we are living in a very uh, it is a very interesting time where digitalization, the digital age becomes the feature of our time. I think from time to time we have to recognize that not only the children, look at us now, we are here, we can communicate with one another because we have access to the screen time, we have access to digital device. So very often when we talk about technology, and children, it seems like it's a separate discussion from when we talk about technology and adult. We always talk about the dangers of technology to young children, but we rarely talk about the dangers of technology to adult. And I think again, it is rooted in a very traditional understanding that is predicated on this protectionist paradigm in viewing young children. Children are always positioned as a vulnerable being, as a passive being, and there is also this understanding that children, to some extent, they are different from adults, and hence the way we treat children is always different from the way we treat children. But again, as I've mentioned before, the protectionist paradigm can actually be quite problematic, especially if we look at the United Nations Convention of the Children's Right. We all know that when we talk about children's right, there are two pillars attached to it. The first pillar is the pillars of protection. So indeed, children needs to be protected. We need to ensure children's safety, children's security, and also children's well-being. But at the same time, there is another pillar of children's right, which is participation. How to make sure that despite the fact that children needs to be protected, we can also provide space for children so that they can participate fully. If we look at the United Nations Convention of Children's Rights, for example, it is very clear that children's right for participation is not limited to particular aspect only. Children have fully right to participate in the decision-making process, and for them to be able to be engaged in the decision-making process, they need to have a full access to the information. So if we all agree that technology in one way or another provide us with a vast amount of information, that information also needs to be accessed by young children. By all information, of course, we are talking about developmentally appropriate information. But I think, again, the purpose of today's discussion is to sort of like disrupt the binary between the highly dominant protectionist approach and also the liberalist paradigm. So I think I invite each and every one of us to go back to the United Nations Convention of Children's Rights, in which participation sort of like becomes a vehicle in order to bridge to balance, to create the bridge to balance between the protectionist and also the liberalist approach. Uh, and again, as I've mentioned before, we are living in this age when we have access to various amount of information. And in one way or another, it provides children with a possibility for them to equip themselves with knowledge, with information that, as I've mentioned before, it will give them more power in order to be engaged in the decision-making process. Later on, I will be speaking about how we need to treat children as part of our citizen, and in order for them to be able to exercise their citizenship, they need to be engaged in the decision-making process. And it is not something radical, actually. It is not something new. If we look at all around the world, we know people like Greta Thunberg, for example, who shocked the world when she was 8 years old, and she was already leading a protest questioning the government about what efforts they had done in order to protect the earth from the climate changes. So what I'm trying to say is that maybe it's not related to technology, but using that example alone, I think it is an evidence how young children actually can really exercise their rights of participation, their rights to be engaged in the decision-making process, their rights to participate in the country's development, and also their rights to engage in a citizenship process. And that can only be done when children have access to information. Of course, we also need to be careful and also to raise concern about the exposure to inappropriate or harmful content. But it doesn't mean that children should not have access to that kind to the information. And in one way or another, the digital age also provide a shift in social interaction and relationship. It changes the way we human interact with one another. I think 10 years ago, if I couldn't travel to UPSI, then I wouldn't be there. So if I had an invitation from Professor Manslina, for example, to attend the conference, and I couldn't be there in person, and that's it, then my attendance would be canceled. But nowadays, it's very easy to facilitate my presence using online technology like what we do today. So there is a shift in social interaction in relationship, and I have to say, it's one of the lesson learned that we gained from the COVID-19, that yes, COVID was it's one of the tragedy that ever happened in the human history, but at the same time, it also provide us with so much lesson learned. And one of the lesson learned is that technology can really facilitate human interaction. Technology can really facilitate human learning. And I have to say, we haven't really used that opportunity when we talk about children, and because if we look at children, especially young children, my background is early childhood education. So if you look at early childhood education, I'm not quite sure Malaysia, but I've done research with colleagues of mine during COVID-19, and we found out that early childhood education was not prepared to deal with all the changes during COVID-19. And there are a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that, again, there is this idea that technology was harmful for young children. So when COVID-19 require us to use technology, then it becomes a challenge for the teachers, for the center to navigate how to use technology. But at the same time, I also have to say that even though technology facilitate human interaction, still there are aspects of human interaction that cannot be translated by technology. And it was very evident in early childhood education setting, for example. In early childhood education setting, we know that early childhood education is built by two dominant aspects, which is education and caring. And caring is something that is very difficult to be translated during online learning. And that's why the whole learning process for early childhood education during COVID-19 became extremely challenging compared to, for example, university. I myself, as a professor in a university, for example, COVID-19 was also difficult for me, for my student. We needed sometimes to navigate how to incorporate technology, but we managed to do it. And one of the reasons, because as adult student, we could expect them to be more independent. A lot of assignment, for example, discussion took place in the online space during the COVID. But for young children, how did you manage? How could we translate the notion of caring? Young children, they needed to be hugged. They need to be stimulated physically. They need a physical interaction with their teachers. So that's why during COVID-19, it was extremely difficult. So what I'm trying to say is, again, trying to go beyond the binary of bad and good when talking about technology. I think we need to recognize that, yes, technology provide us with opportunity to interact with people who normally in a normal situation we will not be able to interact, because it is facilitated by the technology. But at the same time, there are still also other aspects of social interaction, human relationship, that cannot be fully translated by technology. And then another thing that I would like to mention is that I think nowadays when we talk about life skills and also literacy nowadays no longer confined to only the ability to read, to write, or to understand text, or to engage in a conversation. But literacy, I think it comprises more comprehensive aspect of human life skills, and digital skills becomes one of the most important aspect nowadays. I think there was the popular discourse always suggests that young children, they are considered to be the native digital citizens, because since they are born, they have been already exposed to this vast amount of information, to the rapid development of technology, while our generation, my generation, perhaps not your generation, but my generation, perhaps we could be considered as somehow the immigrant digital, the immigrant, not the native digital, but the immigrant digital. Because when I was born, there was no technology in a way that we are using technology now. So we really need to challenge ourselves to undergo the learning and unlearning process about how we have to navigate our life using the technology. But the children, they are different. Since they are born, they've been already exposed to technology. So limiting the access or prohibiting their access to technology might not be a wise things to do, because it's their reality. They are born with it. And I think the skill to use the digital, the skill to use technology is also a very important skill, because now new skills such as coding, digital media creation, and in fact, exposing young children to technology can actually lead them to be aware with the online safety. So it's always a balance between how to ensure that children have access to technology, while at the same time protecting their safety. However, we also need to still recognize that despite all the perhaps positive things that we acknowledge regarding technology, there are still some impacts that technology can bring. And I think number of research, excessive amount of research have been conducted in this area, that the excessive use of digital technology can also impact our physical and mental health. And I think it was very evident during COVID-19. The number of mental health issues were increasing during COVID-19. And again, because I think, as we mentioned before, yes, technology can facilitate human interaction, but still there are things that cannot be fully translated by technology. And that's why if we are relying only on technology in order to interact with another human being, that it will really impact our mental health. Mental health can be very much deteriorated. Yeah. So I think this is something that we already know. When we talk about children and childhood, there are some milestones. Please bear in mind that even though this milestone appears to be something universally, but I think we also need to take into account the cultural differences, the ethnicity differences, the socioeconomic differences. So what I'm trying to say is that while this can be serving as a framework in order for us to understand children and childhood, but we also need to bear in mind that each children, they are different, that each children are unique. So there might be some variation when we talk about specific children and specific childhood, especially children from the minority background. But in general, this is our understanding regarding the development of children and childhood. And I think if we look at in the milestone of children and childhood in the beginning of the years, 0 to 5 years, especially the early childhood years, I think there is this general understanding that few children somehow as innocent being. Again, I think it's going back again to this whole discourse of protectionist children, that young children, they are vulnerable, they are passive, they need to be protected, and it is considered to be dangerous to teach young children with a lot of things which is considered to be inappropriate for their development. So very often children are not encouraged to be engaged in a put in quote a controversial topic. I put in quote because what considered to be controversial in one culture may not be considered to be controversial in another culture. So that's why, for example, in many society, teaching sex education to young children is still stigmatized because there is this understanding that information is harmful to the children. Of course, research has shown that it's not true that teaching young children sex education can actually teach them about boundaries, about consent and everything, and it will protect them instead of bring harm to them. And I think the same thing with technology. I think, again, the dominant understanding when we talk about technology and children, we believe we are concerned. There was this concern that if the children are exposed too much to technology, it will be harmful for them, because again, it's going back to the idea that children doesn't know how to deal with this vast amount of information. And again, I think while this seems to be, in nature, it tries to protect the children, but in reality, it can actually prevent the child from getting access to information. So again, I think balancing the idea of how can we protect the children, and also how can we ensure the children to have access to information, to have access to technology, because as we discussed earlier, technology is inevitable in this digital age, becomes very important. But perhaps to do that, we also need to change the way we think about children and childhood. While we do have a milestone in order to understand the children development, this milestone should not be served as a standard. This milestone should not be treated as something universal. I think we need to be engaged in the process of always unpacking our understanding about children and childhood. Yesterday, I had a discussion with Professor Nakatsuba from Japan, for example. We did a webinar together, and it was very interesting that he shared his research with us, and he shared that in Japan, Japanese society, they have a very strong value of competitiveness, and it has been taught since the very young age. So in the kindergarten, teachers teach these children the skill of competitiveness. And if we look at from the American perspective, for example, from the Western perspective, competitiveness might not be value because it's seen as developmentally inappropriate. So again, I think I just would like to provide an example of how children development can be different from one culture to another. So I think what I'm trying to say is that our understanding that see young children as somehow being vulnerable, being passive, that needs to be continuously protected, I think it comes from the dominant understanding in the developmental psychology. If you look at theories such as Zen Piaget or any other theory, I think implicitly in their theory is this idea that young children are unable to have access to various amount of information, that they cannot make a discrimination between of all the information that they have, and hence they need to be protected. And we go an extreme way when we are protecting the children, inhibiting their access to the technology. Yeah. So I think again, when we talk about technology, it's I think this quotation from the Christian Loslange really give us an idea of the dominant understanding of technology in our society. That when we talk about technology, it's always like a double-edged sword. Yeah, that in one hand we recognize it is useful tools, but at the same time it's also very dangerous. So I think I really like the words she's using here, yeah, that it is a useful servant, meaning that it can really help us, facilitate us in accomplishing our task, but at the same time it's also a dangerous master. If we are not careful, then we can be we can be enslaved by technology. Instead of making technology as our helper, that we will become the assistant, so technology becomes our master. And I think that needs to be that's why technology needs to be yes, technology needs to be treated with cautious. We see what happened with the artificial intelligence, for example. I've done a couple of courses on artificial intelligence, and I think if we can use it wisely, it can actually be very powerful for teachers. For example, it can help the teachers to do the lesson planning. It can help the teachers to do all the administrative stuff. But the problem is that there is a tendency that we would like to use AI in order to replace our tasks. And I think that's where the problem is. We rely so much, we trust technology so much without any hesitation, without any reservation. And that's why it becomes our master instead of our servant. And I think the same thing with children. Technology, based on our previous discussion, I hope it's clear by now that technology can be very, very useful. Technology is needed by the children because, again, we cannot deny that they are living in this digital age. But at the same time, I think consideration still needs to be made in order to ensure that technology serves its purpose, which is to helping human being, which is to make our life better, not the other way around. Yeah. Now, and I think when we talk about children and childhood, obviously we cannot separate the parents as well, because again, and I think one of the lessons learned during the COVID-19 is that why, as I mentioned before, early childhood education suffered during the COVID-19, and one of the reasons is that because we were not ready of how to use technology, and by we I mean not only the teachers but also the parents, because unlike any other educational settings such as secondary education or higher education, when we talk about early childhood and also primary education, there is still they need to have a strong partnership between teachers and parents. So very often the teachers will explain particular theme, and then we'll ask assistance from the parents of helping the children to do the task at home. And this is where the problem comes in, because many parents feel like, why did they have to be the one who teach their children, and they still need to pay for the tuition fee, for example. So as the result, I'm not sure about in Malaysia, but in Indonesia, many early childhood education center has to be closed because parents refuse to pay the tuition fee, and most of the center are relying on the tuition fee. And one of the reasons why parents refuse to pay the tuition fees, that because parents thought that, why do I have to pay the tuition fee if I'm the one who teach my children? at home. So I think there is this misunderstanding that parents felt that if they have paid the tuition fee, it means the responsibility lies solely on the teachers. But actually, when we talk about children, young children, early childhood education children, primary education children, partnership between parents and teachers are really needed. So when we talk about how can we incorporate the use of technology in the life of young children, it really requires a partnership between schools and also between parents. So when we talk about parent in the digital age, I think we also need to recognize that the parenting style also needs to be accommodated in a way that it is responsive with the advancement of technology. Uh, and I think this is why more research on the parenting in the digital age is needed, because very often when we talk about parenting theories, we rely on the old traditional theories on parenting, which to some extent it is useful. But again, all theories are always time and space situated. All theories were built in a particular setting. It was based, all theories were based on research in particular context. So now the context has changed, that we have uh, the technology is something that perhaps during the time of Diana Bomrin, if you know Diana Bomrin is one of the most prominent theories for parenting. But during her time, technology was not there. So I'm not saying that we cannot use her theories, but I think we need to conduct more and more research in the area so that we can come up with the most recent and perhaps the most responsive theories to the changes that we and our children are facing today. So I think when we talk about what parents should do in this digital age in order to provide the balance for the children, ensuring that the young children, they are protected, their security, their safety, their well-being are protected in the online space, but at the same time also ensuring that the children can have access to this new technology. So we all agree that young children should not be exposed to excessive screen time. But I think we should not discriminate technology. When we talk about screen time, very often we limit our understanding to things like a handphone, a tablet, and also computer. But we don't talk about television, for example. Television is also a form of technology. Exposing the children to television is also a kind of exposing them to screen time. So I think we need to be clear that when we talk about technology, it's all aspect of technology that we need to apply this rule of trying not to expose them to excessive time. But at the same time, I think parent also needs to set up as a role model. Very often, parents limit the screen time among their children, but then they themselves they don't limit themselves in using technology. So when we go to the restaurant, for example, we will see sometimes it's a parent who's playing around with the handphone. So I think if parents would like to limit the screen time among their children, they need to set an example. They themselves need to do the same thing, because children learn by doing. Children will do whatever the parents are doing. So setting example is very clear. And by setting example, it's also showing the children the best way to use technology. We cannot say to the children that you can't use the technology, you can't play with your iPad, you can't play with your handphone, but at the same time, parents continuously playing. I think it shows a very contradictory message to the children. And also, there are some online safety that the parents needs to implement. So things like setting up a password, ensuring that, for example, when they have a share account in the YouTube, for example, or in the Netflix, then the particular password is applied when it comes to watching things which is considered to be developmentally inappropriate. And also having this conversation with the children about the do's and don'ts in using technology. And again, we have to believe that young children can engage in this meaningful conversation. So I have 3 children. They are all now growing up, no longer young children. But when they were little, we had this conversation about whether they can have a Facebook account. And I've shown an example, for example, of various cases. And then as the result, they were only using social media when they are a little bit bigger. So I've seen many parents that try to manipulate their children in order for their children to have a social media account. I think it teach a very wrong message to the children, not about the using of technology, but the fact that you can lie in order to have what you want. So when you have this conversation with your children, then you will reach to a shared understanding that okay, at what age do you can have access to social media, or what do you need to post in social media. And again, setting up example is very important. If the parents themselves post almost anything in social media, we cannot expect the children not to do the same. So I think really showing by example is a very powerful thing that the parents can do. And always from time to time having this conversation and giving the trust to the children gradually. So when they were, for example, when the age for the children to have a social media in Facebook, for example, is 13 years old, if I'm not mistaken. So the parents can have a conversation. Let's say by 13 years old, they have this social media, but perhaps the password can be shared with the parents. And slowly we are giving the trust to them. When they are reaching 17, they can have full access to their social media. And we trust them that they are not going to do anything harmful in this space. So I think having this ongoing continuous conversation to ensure the online safety is very important. Having a shared understanding. So rather than using them in a top-down approach that parents dictate the parents, but engaging in a family conversation. Yeah, and again, I think and it is related with the third point, which is on the digital ethic. And I think digital ethic really teaching the children with responsible digital behavior, including respect for others and also appropriate online interaction. And again, it has to be set by an example from the parents. If from time to time the children see that the parents post almost everything, run almost about everything on social media, we cannot expect them not to do the same. So I think using the opportunity that when we teach young children of how to use digital ethic by also doing it ourselves is I think sending a very powerful message to the children. And despite the fact that technology is very useful for today's life, but I think it is also important from time to time for parents to maintain family bonding, maintaining strong family connection, doing other activities that doesn't really require technology from time to time. And so it's always like creating this balance between using technology as a space to connect between one another. I think in almost every family now we have a WhatsApp family group, which I think can be very powerful because when you are working parents, for example, who often travel, then it really becomes a space for you to connect with one another. But also ensuring when you are together physically, then you are also engaged in non-technology activities, non-screen activities that really can enhance a more emotional level connection. Yeah. And I think one of the things that we also need to teach our children when we talk about technology is sort of like reminding them from time to time about this digital footprint. I think one of the challenge in using technology, especially in using social media, for example, that whatever we do, we will leave a digital footprint. Yeah, and I think I'm not sure if it is completely true, but I've heard that a lot of employers, for example, nowadays they are also using social media in order to understand their workers, for example, or if someone apply for a job, so the company very often will ask for their social media, and then they will try to see the kind of attitude the person express online. And even if we are applying for a visa, for example, if we are applying for an American visa, they always ask for our social media, meaning that they would like to understand our behavior by seeing our digital footprint. Because I think one of the things in technology, they don't really have the concept that human can change. I mean, in reality, we all understand that human can change, that 10 years ago we posted something and perhaps our view has changed. But the problem with social media, unless we delete it and there is still a way to retract it, the information will be there. And so I think it is important that it is important to teach the children, to teach our children that they really need to navigate their digital landscape, ensuring that the digital footprint, the information that they leave behind will not affect their privacy, safety, and also online reputation, and also, uh, you know, ensuring them to understand that very often our online reputation will be impact our offline reputation. And I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to have with the children in order for them to be able to use the technology wisely. Yeah. So again, as I've mentioned before, hopefully it is clear in the presentation, in the discussion, that technology is something that we need to be treated with balance, that we cannot stop access of the children to technology because technology provide them with a lot of information that might be beneficial for them, but at the same time we still need to be cautious when encouraging our children to use technology. And one of the reasons why we cannot limit their access or stop their access to technology, because again, as I've mentioned before, the children, they are part of the city, they are part of the nation citizen. And nowadays with the development of technology, they become part of what we call as digital citizenship. So whether we like it or not, as I've mentioned before, they are born as a native digital. They are born when the technology is already there. So instead of prohibiting them to use technology, we need to teach them. We need to work with them of how to use technology. There are a lot of schools, for example, in Indonesia, that prohibits children to use technology in the school, especially in the madrasah, in Islamic boarding school. Very often, the children could not have handphone at all, for example. And I think, again, I'm not quite sure if it is a wise thing to do, because again, by completely prohibiting their access to technology, then the technology is still there, whether we like it or not. We can prevent the children to use technology in the school, but the technology will still be there. So if it is not the teachers, the parents who teach them how to use technology, then they'll be learning from someone else, from their peers. And very often when they are learning from their peers, it will be irresponsible learning. So instead of learning technology the way it should be, then this is when technology can be very harmful. So I think I'm more into allowing the children to use technology in the school, but making sure it is done under the teacher's guidance. The same thing, we can allow the children to use technology at home, but ensuring that it is done under the parents' supervision. And we have to do that because, again, they are part of digital citizenship. If we don't teach them the correct way to use technology, then they'll be learning from someone else. And I think this is where the problem will come in, where they're learning from irresponsible sources, from irresponsible person, their peer, for example, or another irresponsible adult. So in one way or another, we still need to teach them how to use technology because they are part of the digital citizenship. So again, as I've mentioned before, we need to teach them how to do the safe online practices, information like ensuring that they're keeping the personal information private. They don't share everything on the digital space, avoiding online strangers, and also from time to time always being cautious with what they share online. And as I've discussed before, parents and teachers need to become a model of ethical behavior. So we need to demonstrate positive digital habits. If we would like our children not to use excessive amount of screen time, then we have to be the model. We also need to do that. If we would like to ensure that the children do not post everything online, then we also need to do the same thing. If we would like to make sure that the children use appropriate language online, then as an adult, as a parent, as a teacher, we also need to do the same thing. And also from time to time, we are showing the children that in-person interaction is always preferred than online interaction. That's why I think we need to have habits at home, that when we are talking, for example, in the during the dinner time, or in another time, we don't really use technology. Yeah. And Whether we like it or not, again, I think technology can be very useful because it is encourage critical thinking, and it's actually, as I've mentioned before, it challenge the traditional way of we understand children and childhood. If we look at the theories from Jean Piaget, for example, Piaget suggests that young children, especially age as 2 to 6 years old, they are in pre-operational stage, meaning that they cannot be they don't have the capacity to think critically. All their thinking are very concrete, yeah, very empirical. They cannot think something which is abstract and also critical. But if we look at technology, for example, if we look at a game, for example, most of the games, online games, for example, they don't come up with particular rules. The children, they need to find out the rules by themselves. So actually playing game can also allow the children to develop critical thinking, again, if it is done appropriately, time, content, and everything. It's something that not very much often discussed when we talk about technology. Then technology can actually uh, stimulate critical thinking. And also, in addition to the game online that I've mentioned before, the technology can also help the children to develop the ability to evaluate online content and identify misinformation. And it is the skill that has to be taught. That's why for me, I'm not really, I don't completely agree with the idea that prohibit the children to bring technology to school, because I think we miss the opportunity to teach them. If it is not in the school, if it is not at home, we are teaching them of how to use technology. Where else they will learn it? As I've mentioned before, then they will learn it from irresponsible sources. They will learn it from someone else who might be bringing more harmful information to them. So I think if we are teaching them how to use technology appropriately,
Excuse me, Prof.
yeah.
I'm so sorry. We really enjoy your insights, but to stay on the schedule, we'll need to move to the next part of the program shortly. If
Ada,
you could just wrap up, yeah.
sure.
Thank you very much.
I only have one more slide. That's it.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. So I'm moving on to my slide. Yeah. I think next slide. I think this is already mentioned. And again, I think the last thing that I would like to talk about is the role of educators. So the role of the teachers. Yeah. So again, I think teachers, we have a possibility to teach the children of how to use technology appropriately. So we can teach them about digital citizenship. We can also integrate technology in a more meaningful way. We can become the model of healthy technology habits, of how to use technology appropriately and in a more meaningful way. We can also promote digital literacy. And again, partnership with parents becomes very important. So I think that's it from me. Sorry, I didn't notice about the time. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward for our discussion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Prof.